canceled fights that would have fed generations. Let's get into the list. Here it is, 10 canceled fights that would have fed generations. Marcel Dorf, the Twitter GOAT for releasing fight announcements. If you scroll through his Twitter, there's a lot of gold there. So some of the fights that got announced that never happened would have been absolutely epic. Let's start with the first one. This is a classic. Zabit Magomed taking on Yair Rodriguez. This was scheduled 2 times. And the second time it was scheduled, it would have been for the #1 contendership. Volk had just beaten Max Holloway for the second time. So they were not planning on the Max Holloway-Volk trilogy at this moment. If this fight were to take place, the winner would have most definitely fought Alexander Volkanovski for the title. But alas, what ended up happening, this fight gets canceled. Yair ends up fighting Max Holloway. Zabit ends up retiring, doesn't even fight again, hasn't fought since. So the fact that Zabit was literally 1 fight away from fighting for the title, and then now is just retired in the retirement home in Dagestan, and this would have been a banger. Let's talk about the matchup itself. Striker versus striker. Zabit does have some grappling in his back pocket, but this would have been a kickboxing delight. Leg kick for leg kick. High kick for high kick, crane kick for crane kick. This would have been an epic matchup. Next fight that got canceled that would have fed families is Movsar Evloev against Ilia Topuria. It's funny because when Ilia Topuria beat Volk for the title, a lot of people were saying, you know, Movsar versus Ilia was the fight to make for the title. Now, this fight got booked in October 2021. At the time, Volk was the champ, and he had already beaten Holloway twice. They were trying to schedule Holloway versus Volk for the trilogy. They ended up doing Volk versus Korean Zombie. Not saying that the winner of this would have gotten a title shot, but at the time, Ilia's best win was Ryan Hall, and Movsar Evloev's best win was Hakeem Dawodu. Neither guy had fought anyone in the upper echelon of the rankings. Evloev, since this, has gone on a 4-fight winning streak, is still undefeated. And Ilia, since this, has won every fight in his path and won the title, beat Max Holloway, beat Volkanovski, and is now moved up to lightweight. So this fight actually may never materialize because Ilia is a lightweight now. And the fact that it could have happened years ago is crazy. And the fact that it should have happened for the featherweight title very recently is also crazy. And the fact that we're just never going to get it is kind of crazy. If we're going to talk about the matchup itself, Movsar, decision merchant, he just knows how to win a fight. Ilia, finish merchant, he knows how to finish a fight. It would have been an epic clash of styles. Would have loved to see these two throw down the octagon. Next fight that would have fed generations, would have fed families. This one's crazy. I didn't even know this was a thing. Dricus du Plessis was supposed to take on Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. So if you think about it, right now, Dricus is the middleweight champ, and Fluffy is a top 5 contender, basically 1 fight away from the title shot. So in theory, we could get this matchup in the next 12 months. If Fluffy wins his next fight, whoever it may be against, he could get a title shot. You know, I know there's a lot of people clogging up the top, like Kyle Baralho and Nasruddin Imavov. They are deserving of a shot as well. But Fluffy is right there after beating Michel Pereira. So back then, when this fight got booked, Dricus' best win was Trevin Giles. He has no ranked wins. And Fluffy was plus 400 against Rodolfo Vieira and beat him by submission, which no one beats Rodolfo Vieira by submission. That's what he does. He beats people by submission. So at the time, this wasn't like a hyped up matchup. It was a great matchup between 2 prospects that could potentially move forward in the middleweight division. And what ended up happening? This fight gets canceled. Dricus beats Brad Tavares. Fluffy, I believe, beats Marc-Andre Barriault and Josh Fremd. They never cross paths again. Dricus gets to the title shot. Dricus wins the title, defends it. Fluffy continues to win, hasn't lost since this fight got booked. And it's just crazy that they booked this when neither man was ranked. It was almost like they had an inkling that these guys would be great. And it's unfortunate we didn't get to see it, but I think it's actually fortunate because at the time of this booking, both guys were green. You know, both guys were still prospects. Now they're both insanely well-rounded, all in on training. This would be an epic fight if booked this year. In 2022, it would have still been epic. Next fight we're going to talk about it's not really a banger. It's just interesting. You know, it's not a banger. It's interesting. Maybe it wouldn't have fed generations. Maybe it would just feed, like, your son. You know, it would feed, like, one family member. But Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Nathaniel Wood. They booked this in 2020. And it's relevant now because Nathaniel Wood is, he's actually getting a nice win streak under his belt. He just beat Morgan Charrier, so potentially Nathaniel Wood's next fight is going to be a fight that gets him into the rankings. And it's just funny because this would have been Umar Nurmagomedov's debut. It got canceled. At the time, if Nathaniel Wood took this fight and fought it, if he were to lose, he would have been on a 2-fight losing streak, and he was probably 1 fight loss away from getting cut from the UFC. But Nathaniel Wood did not, this fight did not materialize. Nathaniel Wood ends up going on a winning streak, establishing his name more in the UFC. Umar doesn't take this fight, goes on a win streak, gets to the title shot, loses to Merab. It's crazy because these guys are very similar, and I would have liked to see this matchup play out stylistically. Umar all in on the takedowns, Nathaniel Wood not the best takedown defense, maybe, but Nathaniel Wood's cardio could potentially outwork Umar's. There's a lot of moving parts in this matchup between two bantamweight prospects. Just wanted to throw this in there because I was like, wow, this actually happened. That's crazy. Didn't know that. It would have been a good matchup, I think. I would have, Umar would have been like minus 400 if being honest, but still a good matchup nonetheless. Next canceled fight. This one would have fed not only generations, it would have fed like people in the 1800s. You know what I'm saying? Like this one would have transcended time. I'm talking about Henry Cejudo taking on Jose Aldo at UFC 250. So basically what happened here was Cejudo had just beaten Marlon Moraes for the vacant bantamweight strap. So at this point, Henry Cejudo is a double champ. You could say triple champ because of his Olympic gold medals, but double UFC champ. Jose Aldo had just lost to Marlon Moraes by a very, very controversial decision. So rather than Cejudo fighting anyone else, they were trying to give him Jose Aldo. Peter Yan was a potential opponent as well, but they were like, you know what, we're going to go with Jose Aldo. And then what ended up happening? Coronavirus, COVID struck, and this fight just got axed, and Cejudo ended up fighting Dominic Cruz, and then he retired for a couple of years, and then Aldo ended up fighting Peter Yan, and he gets smoked by Peter Yan, absolutely demolished. But I think this fight stylistically would have been a great one, Cejudo at the time was a great striker, a good wrestler. Aldo at the time still had a good chin, was good at anti-wrestling. He really does bad against pressure punchers. Cejudo wasn't really that. This fight would have been, I think it would have been a banger. It would have been close, would have been a banger, it would have been between two all-time greats. They did end up going with Cejudo versus Cruz, so I guess in theory, they still gave Cejudo his legacy fight against an all-time bantamweight. But against Aldo, this would have been great because, Aldo was kind of still in his prime. He hadn't, suffered a bunch of losses in a row yet. This would have been great. This next fight has been rumored for years to happen. But we just simply never got it. It just never happened. It never materialized one way or another. It just never happened. But at one point in time, it was booked. It was actually booked. And Marcel Dorf, as my witness, Dustin Poirier versus Nate Diaz was supposed to happen. And if it did happen, there's potential that it would have been for a #1 contender shot because Dustin Poirier was supposed to fight Nate Diaz in 2018. Dustin Poirier, I believe, I can't recall who he had just beaten, but he didn't fight Nate Diaz, and he ended up fighting Max Holloway for the vacant lightweight strap, I believe, after Khabib dropped it. So, Dustin Poirier versus Nate Diaz, this was supposed to be taking place at, I think, lightweight, because Nate Diaz was just coming off of his back-to-back fights against McGregor, where he looked very good, his stock was up. If Nate Diaz were to win this fight, there is high potential that he would have fought Max Holloway for the lightweight strap. There's high potential that Nate Diaz could have fought, in 2018, he could have fought Tyron Woodley if this fight took place at welterweight. They would have given Nate Diaz a title shot if he goes out there and beats Dustin Poirier. And I think stylistically in 2018, Nate Diaz still had it. Still was a great striker. Was good at not getting submitted. It wasn't really a takedown guy. So on the feet, this would have been spectacular. And in the grappling, both guys have very solid jiu-jitsu. And I think in the grappling, it would have been just as equally as cool to watch as well. This fight is a banger. Potential fantasy matchmaking, but it literally got booked at one point in time, and it would have been for a title shot, most likely. Because Nate Diaz ended up fighting Jorge Masvidal, and then Masvidal beats him, and then fights for the title against Usman. So There is a timeline where Nate Diaz could have fought for the lightweight strap, Nate Diaz could have fought for the welterweight strap. It just so happens that the fights that he needed fell out at the worst possible time. He could have even fought for the welterweight strap if he beat Leon Edwards, if he knocked him out in round 5 in that fight that happened recently. So Nate Diaz, it's kind of sad. I don't believe he's ever actually fought for the title, but he's had multiple opportunities to get to a title shot, including this one, and just never happened. Next fight we're gonna talk about. It's not that it would have fed generations, but it would have been cool to see prospect versus prospect. Sean Brady taking on Jack Della Maddalena. It's kind of crazy that this fight got booked April 2023, when Sean Brady was number 9, JDM was number 13, right? JDM was on a 4-fight finish streak. He had a long winning streak outside the UFC, then it carries over to a 4-fight winning streak in the UFC. And Sean Brady was undefeated and recently just got knocked out on the feet by Belal Muhammad. So, in theory, JDM was going to probably knock out Sean Brady, for being honest. Sean Brady hadn't elevated his game yet at this point. Sean Brady was just a one-trick pony that was only good at grappling and wrestling. He didn't really have any striking to his game. I think JDM would have capitalized on that, and I think JDM would have knocked out Sean Brady at this point in time. Nowadays, I think Sean Brady actually has high potential to win this matchup. But back then, let's say JDM knocks out Sean Brady, he would have had a 2-fight KO losing streak. He probably would have been ejected from the rankings, if we're being honest. And he probably would have needed to fight someone just outside the rankings to get back in, like a Michael Morales or someone like a Carlos Prates. But, you know, it's funny because now JDM is fighting for a title against Belal, and Sean Brady is ranked number 1 in the welterweight division now. So, kind of crazy how things turn out when fights get canceled. We could have had Sean Brady just be irrelevant and non-existent, but now he is number 1 in the division after not having to have fought JDM. It's interesting how things work out. Now, this next fight, you know, not generational, you know, because we have seen this type of fight happen. Let's just get into it. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson taking on Michel Pereira. You know, Stephen Thompson fought Kevin Holland, and in that fight, he just basically smoked Kevin Holland on the feet. And coincidentally, Stephen Thompson was coming off the Kevin Holland win when this fight got booked. Michel Pereira, mainly a striker, I could have seen it playing similarly to the Holland versus Wonderboy fight, where it's a staring contest, and then Wonderboy just capitalizes on the striking as the fight goes on. You know, Pereira's, we've seen his cardio get gassed recently as well, so I'm sure that Wonderboy could have been able to out-cardio him if this fight took place as well, if it was 5 rounds, if it was like a main event type. But, you know, Stephen Wonderboy versus Michel Pereira, we're talking about his style, like what would actually happen in the fight. The striking would have been spectacular to see. But I mean, capoeira strikes from Michel Pereira against the karate strikes of Wonderboy Thompson would have been cool. You know, maybe Michel Pereira can activate some jiu-jitsu as well. He has that in his back pocket. If Michel Pereira were to win this fight, he would have definitely avoided the Fluffy Hernandez fight, which is what got him smoked. And this would have most likely elevated Pereira to a number 1 contenders fight. He would have been ranked number 7. So it's funny how things work out. You know, Michel Pereira doesn't take this fight, ends up fighting Fluffy Hernandez, ends up getting smoked. Now he's just considered irrelevant. But this fight was way more advantageous for his style. If he were to go out there and beat Wonderboy Thompson, then we would consider Michel Pereira like a perennial top 5 welterweight. So, just funny how things work out. Now, this next fight might be a little controversial. You know, I am a huge fan of one of these fighters. He did get fraud checked recently, so it's kind of hard to say that this would have been a good fight, considering he got a fraud check. But let's just get into it. Nasruddin Imavov taking on Ikram Aliskerov. Ikram Aliskerov had only fought 1 time in the UFC. It was a round 1 knockout. And they were like, you know what? Let's push this guy to the moon. We're going to give him Nasruddin Imavov. He's ranked 13 at the time, and his last 2 fights were very mid. He had a no contest against Chris Curtis, I think, and he lost to Sean Strickland. So he couldn't beat either of those training partners. So he just can't beat anyone out of that gym, it seems. And then they were like, you know what, Nasruddin, we're going to send you on your way. We're going to have Ikram come in here and just KO you and end your UFC career. So the funny thing is, at the time, Ikram would have probably been the favorite, if we're being honest. Ikram would have been like minus 200 because he was like he was a killing machine. He was just destroying everything in his path. And Nasruddin had shown big weaknesses in the cardio, in his chin. durability. It's funny how things work out because this fight gets canceled, right? Ikram ends up, fighting a couple more fights, fights Robert Whittaker out of nowhere, gets smoked. Now Ikram is just irrelevant, I guess. Nathaniel Imavov doesn't take this fight, ends up going on a 4-fight winning streak since this fight got booked, and now just destroyed Israel Adesanya and is in line for a title fight. So, funny how things work out. Ikram wins this. All of a sudden, we take him really seriously. Probably avoids a short notice Whittaker fight. Probably gets a more advantageous spot for himself. Nasruddin, he is a tricky guy because an honorable mention, he was supposed to fight Gregory Rodriguez on the Dana White Contender Series. Did not know this. And Imavov is the one that withdrew. So, imagine RoboCop versus Imavov. I can easily, in 2020, I could have easily seen RoboCop winning that and smoking Nasruddin. Nowadays, obviously, Nasruddin is super well-rounded. But back then, this guy was a French kickboxer with not that much wrestling to go to, and the striking was very slow, very mid. I feel like he's evolved tenfold since this fight got announced, and he could have gotten smoked by Ikram, he could have gotten smoked by RoboCop, but now he's ranked number 1, just like Sean Brady. Just avoids all the bad fights, only takes the good fights, ranked number 1. Crazy how that works out. And of course, I can't make this video in good conscience without bringing up one of the all-time great canceled fights. And I'm talking about Leon Edwards and Khamzat Chimaev. I've been waiting to make a video where I incorporate this. This is crazy. This fight got booked 3 times, and all 3 times it got canceled. The first time, it was Leon Edwards, actually. He got COVID. The second time, it was scheduled for a month later. Chimaev had COVID. And then the third time, scheduled 2 months after that, Chimaev still had COVID. So, at this point, Chimaev was like debating retirement. He just kept pulling out his Leon Edwards fight. He was debating retirement. Chimaev was on I think a 3 or 4 fight UFC finish streak. He's still undefeated to this day. Leon Edwards was on an 8-fight winning streak, begging for his title shot. So the UFC was like, okay, to compromise Leon and to compromise Khamzat, we're going to just match them up, and most likely the winner will get a title shot. What ended up happening was this fight gets canceled. Leon Edwards ends up fighting Bilal, no contest, just gets a title shot after that, after a Nate Diaz win as well. Head kicks Kamaru in round 5. We know the story. Khamzat, since this, he's kind of had to work his way back up. He fought Gilbert Burns. He fought Robert Whittaker. He's fought Li Jing Liang. Just a couple of people that are lurking in the middleweight, welterweight divisions. But he could have gotten a title shot after being in the UFC for only 5 months if this fight were to be booked. If this fight gets booked, Khamzat, I think, wins. Now that we know what we know about Leon, low volume, looking for the big shot type of striker with not a lot of wrestling, Khamzat would have probably smoked this guy, if we're being completely honest. And if Khamzat went out there and finished Leon Edwards, number 1, we would have never had the Leon Edwards title reign. Leon Edwards would have had super non-preferential treatment after this fight. He would have so been booked badly. He would have probably gotten like Bo Nickel next. They would have tried to erase Leon Edwards because of how boring his fight style is sometimes. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Khamzat would have fought Usman for the title when he already and he ended up fighting Usman a year later at Abu Dhabi and beats him as well. It's kind of crazy how history can just change off of a canceled fight, off of something that didn't happen. This would have fed generations. Thank you for getting to the end of another episode of Finn's Chats. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments if I missed any canceled fights. There have been a lot of canceled fights in the last year. I wanted to go back further than the last year. Obviously Ian Gary versus I forgot who, he got canceled. Islam versus Arman got canceled. There's been a lot of fights recently, and it kind of just spurred me to make this little video. So let me know in the comments if there's any fights that I missed that maybe you would like me to talk about in the future. And have a great rest of your day, you